Welcome to a new video from Apasoft Training. During this video, we will learn how to install the free version of Oracle21 Express within a Windows environment. In addition to the installation, we are going to see its characteristics and properties. We will also check that once we have installed it, the software works. The points that we are going to look at during this course are the following. First of all, we are going to study a small introduction to Oracle21 Express, its main features, and its limitations. We will also see the requirements it has. Then we're going to study how to download it, which is the simplest phase of this video. The third step will be to learn how to install the software. In Windows, installation is simpler and faster. And finally, as I mentioned, we are going to check that the software works once we have installed it. Not only are we going to install it, but we must check that it has been installed correctly and that we can access the database. We are going to start with the first part, where what we are going to study is a small introduction to the Oracle21c Express database, the requirements we need to install it, and another series of interesting data about the database. What features does Oracle21 Express have? It is a free version of the Oracle database. It is therefore a version that I can download without having to buy or acquire any license. You will see that it is very easy to download and also to install. In this video, he intends to tell you everything you need to install it without problems. In the chapter where we check that it works correctly, we will see that it has a tool called Enterprise Manager Express that allows you to manage and work with this database in an easy way through a web environment. Although I can use it free of charge, it has a license that has limitations of use, but in principle allows us to use it to develop, implement, distribute, and to train ourselves. You may think that Oracle Express 21 can only be used for very simple applications and tasks, but this is not true. The license allows you to use this version of Oracle to distribute our applications and implement all kinds of projects, as long as you don't exceed limitations that are quite strict. If we comply with these standards, it can be integrated into our applications for free. These memory, CPU, and disk limitations are already integrated into the database engine itself. We do not have to be aware of them. Therefore, we can distribute an application that uses data that is inside this database engine. There are only versions for Windows and Linux. That is, there are no versions for Mac, HP, or any other operating system that you can find on the market. And what limitations does it have? First of all, it only allows 2 CPU cores. My machine may have 200 million cores, but Oracle Express is only going to use 2 cores. It's also limited to 2 gigabytes of RAM. Therefore, I cannot increase the size of memory to be used. Another limitation is that the total storage size of the database cannot be greater than 12 GB. That means that the database I can handle is relatively small. Logically, compared to corporate databases that we may have in companies or corporations, it is a very small size. But for many small or medium applications, it is more than enough. I can only have 1 Oracle Express per server. That is, while with the enterprise version I can have many instances of databases on a machine, with Oracle Express I can only have 1 instance. To be able to download the software, we must open a free account within Oracle, which I am not going to explain in this video, since it is very easy to do. You just have to go to the Oracle page and click on the Create an Account option and you are registered. With that, you can download the software. Where can we install Oracle Express? We can do it, as I told you, in Windows and Linux. Here I have copied the versions of Windows supported today at the time of making this video. If you see this video in 8 months, it is possible that another version has appeared, for example 23, which will surely be very similar to 21. However, the supported versions of Windows and Linux will be a bit different, allowing for more modern versions. In the case of Windows, these versions are supported, although, for example, it can also be installed on Windows 11, but in principle these versions are the ones that are currently indicated within Oracle's requirements. In the case of Linux, you see that they are restricted to Oracle Linux, Red Hat, etc. That is, operating systems that are based on the Red Hat family, And although installation on SUSE is also supported, it is also done through Red Hat packages. As I mentioned, these operating systems are the ones that are in the official documentation, although, for example, I have installed it in a Fedora or in a CentOS, which are also from the Red Hat family. Well, what requirements do we need to do this installation? In principle, they are very few. In the case of Windows, which is what we are studying in this video, you have to have 2 cores and 10 gigabytes of RAM. That's as far as hardware is concerned. As for the software, we don't need anything special in the operating system. If you're using a version of Windows that I mentioned above that are compatible or certified. Of course, we have to use a user account that allows us to work as an administrator, because at some point we will need that type of permission to be able to perform certain operations with the database. We are going to move on to the next chapter, which is where we are going to see how we can download the software to be able to install it. This is the simplest chapter of all the ones we have in this video. In this case, we are going to download the 21c Express version, which is the most recent that exists at the time of making this video. Right now, the installation URL is this one you have here, oracle.com, database, technologies, and exe, downloads. It is possible that when you are watching this video, in 6 months for example, Oracle has changed the address or changed the page, something very common in this type of company. What I recommend, if you see that there is a discrepancy between what I am telling you here and what you see in a year or 6 months, is simply search for Oracle Express Download within Google and it will surely take you to the right screen. You may also have a more modern version, for example 23. Oracle changes these versions from time to time, although normally the characteristics of the database change a little between versions, because approximately every year at most they release a new release, and that release does not usually have many changes with respect to the previous one. In the past, Oracle waited many years to change versions, for example from 10 to 11 or from 11 to 12, and you will find very important changes, which complicated the migration. Oracle now makes shorter updates. That way, migrations and updates are easier to implement. Well, as I told you at the beginning of the video, today you can only download Oracle Express for 3 operating systems, for Windows and for Linux. In the case of Linux, it is available for both Oracle Linux 8 and Oracle Linux 7. Here we have the version for Windows 64, which is the one we are going to use in this video. Select that option to download it. Remember that you have to have a free account created, because it will request a login with that account, and once we have done so it can be downloaded without problems. Now we continue with the installation part. In the case of Windows installation, once we have downloaded the software, we only have to unzip it. It is in zip format, so you can use any program such as WinZip or WinRAR to unzip it. Once we have unzipped it, we will run the setup. We have to run it as an administrator to have the necessary permissions, since among other things the installer is going to create a series of services within Windows. Right-click on the setup file and select Run as Administrator. We will see that an assistant will appear, in which we will be able to indicate the data for the installation. He is going to ask us a series of questions to finish the process. First, a window appears where it says Preparing for Installation. Once it is finished, click on the Next button. On the next screen, I must accept the terms of the license and click on the Next button. On the next screen, it tells us where you want to install the software. By default, it tries to install it within this directory: App, name of the user I'm working with, product, and finally 21c. Actually, we can install the software wherever we want. We just have to change the directory where we want to install it. In this case, I'm going to leave it in the default directory. Click on the Next button. On the next screen, we must enter a password for the administrator users. If we have to do something at the administration or database management level, this is the password I must use to log in as an administrator user. It is important that you write down this password, just in case you have to modify or touch something in the database. These users are typically sys, system, and admin. Once we have entered a secure password, click on the Next button. On this screen, he gives us a summary of the directories he is going to create and the folder where he is going to install the software. The root directory is the directory where you install the database instance, and the Oracle base is the directory from which all the software is installed. The root directory is within Oracle base. Click on the Install button, which begins the installation process. Installation is very simple compared to larger versions, such as Standard or Enterprise, that require much more data. The idea of this version is to install a product that will be useful for developers or for people who want to be trained in SQL or PLSQL. Of course, installation should not be too complicated. I'm going to pause the video until the installation is finished, and we'll continue when it's done. It will take a while, because it has to copy files and has to do a lot of internal processes, including creating services. It will depend on the characteristics of your PC whether it takes more or less. As I mentioned, I'm going to pause the video until I finish installing everything. As we can see here, the database has already finished installing. If everything has been correct, it will tell you that the database has been installed correctly. It gives us the details of the installation. It tells us that to access the multi-container database, we use this path, localhost and port 1521, which is the default port of Oracle databases. What does multi-container mean? To explain it simply, Oracle 21 works with an environment in which we have a database that we can call parent or CDB, container database, that inside can have daughter databases or PDB, pluggable databases. I am explaining it in a very simple way, since it is not my intention to go beyond the concepts necessary for you to understand this architecture. In fact, older versions of Oracle didn't have this way of working. What this data means is that the database has been installed on the local host machine, that is, on our own machine, and is listening on port 1521. And in this second line, it tells us that a daughter database or PDB has been created called XCPDB1. Actually, this is the database to which we have to connect to work with Oracle Express, since the main one or CDB only has metadata. As I tell you, I am telling it in a very simple way so that those of you who have never worked with Oracle can understand it. Finally, the third line tells us how we can access Enterprise Manager Express. EM is a tool in web mode that allows us to manage and work easily with the database. It is very useful for those of you who have no knowledge of Oracle. By default, it listens through port 5500. Once we have done the installation within Windows, we will check that Oracle works correctly. We open a command line, cmd, session. Inside the window, we are going to run a program called SQL+, which is a command line tool from which we can launch commands against the database. Type the following commands: SQL+ space as sysba and press the Enter key. We must make sure to leave the blank spaces that I have indicated well, because otherwise the command fails. If everything is correct, we have entered the tool. I can check that it tells me that we are connected to version 21c. The version and version number may vary, as you may have a more modern or older version than the one I'm using for this video. If you see this message, it means that the installation has worked correctly and that the database is working and has started correctly. Another option to check that the installation has worked and that Oracle is working is to use Enterprise Manager Express, which, as I mentioned, is a small web application that will allow us to manage the database in web mode. It's a much easier way to work with Oracle than using SQL+. It is also true that there are many things that cannot be done with this application, while with SQL+, we can do any operation against the database. To do this, we must open a web browser and type the following URL, https://localhost 5500. A login window should appear with the text, Oracle Enterprise Manager Database Express. Let's enter the connection data. The user is System, which is one of the administrators that appeared when we installed the software. The password is the one we entered during the installation of the database. In the container name field, we have nothing because by default Oracle has already configured a container database, and inside we can have pluggable or daughter databases, as I told you a while ago. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this tool because it's not the purpose of the video. But we can say that within this tool I can work, configure, and manage Oracle Express. The important thing is that if we have been able to enter without problems, this means that the database is working correctly. And the last way to see that the database is properly installed is by logging into Windows services. As I mentioned before, one of the things that the installer does is create a series of services that allow us to start and stop automatically when the PC starts and shuts down. It would also allow us to stop and start the database manually, as we would do with any Windows service. If we open the Windows Services window and look for those that start with Oracle, we will see that we have several of them. If they are working properly, these services should put the running status. The most important ones that should always be running are the XE service, which is the doubts base, and the listener, which accepts user connections. Although there are some other services, these two are the ones you have to take into account. If everything has worked correctly, you already have at your disposal an Oracle21c Express database for Windows. I hope you like this video and see you in the next one. Best regards.